All right. Hello, guys. Again, I know, sorry we're stuck doing this for at least another month, but hopefully this won't be too bad for you. Please make sure you're checking in with your teachers and doing as much as you can every single day. They're still working with central office on how we're going to grade, and you don't want to be ridiculously behind when we figure out how we're going to do that. So just doing your best and logging in and getting either paper packets or doing things online and just doing what you can is what we need to do right now. Okay, so when you look at your screen right now, we need to go to week 2 and you're going to see your assignments. So you can see your chapter 2, you can see the questions, you can see the discussion activity, a different activity, and then some grammar practice. Okay, so just do those the best you can. Guys, remember, you need to type in complete sentences. You need to capitalize words. You need to use punctuation to the best of your ability. Okay, you need to practice this. A lot of things are going to be online, and you have to type correctly just as much as you have to write correctly in class. So practice that. Sorry if you can hear the puppies in the backyard. They're barking like crazy. Okay, so actually real quick before we do this, I wanted to go over the questions just super fast for last week. So to describe George in your own words, he's the shorter one. He's the one that's in control. He's smart, and he takes care of Lenny. He's a little annoyed at some of the stuff that Lenny has done, but you can still see that he cares for him or he wouldn't stick around. Lenny is he's a very large man, but he's very slow. He can't remember things. He would not be able to survive on his own because he can't take care of himself. But he is a grown, large adult male. So him not being able to take care of himself could cause issues, which is why George has to stay around. What animal is Lenny compared to? He is initially compared to a bear. Some of the options that you gave, they did mention, like a mouse or a horse. So those are okay. Don't worry about that. He was just compared to a bear, as in he moves really slow. He's very large. So things like that. Where does George tell Lenny to hide if he gets in any trouble? In the brush over by where the river that they were just leaving. He was like, if you get into trouble, you come here. And he goes, okay, I can remember. And then why do you think George stays with Lenny? Any of these answers were okay because we haven't figured that out yet. We know that he has to take care of him. And somewhere along the line, George made the decision that he needs to take care of Lenny. Sorry about that, I got an email. So we are going to go back to week 2. And we are going to look at these questions real quick so we know what to look for. So where does George and Lenny, why are they late? Number 2, what excuse does George give for Lenny's slowness? So he's going to give an excuse that isn't necessarily true. And then why does George answer all the questions that Lenny needs to be answering? Why does George answer all of those? Number 4, what does Curly think about George and Lenny traveling together? We're going to meet the Curly. And then why do you think the boss is suspicious of George and Lenny? Okay, so that's what we're looking for as we read the first chapter. Again, you don't have to listen to my recording. I suggest that you do just to get pieces of it. But if you want to read it on your own and answer it on your own, you're more than welcome. It's time everyone is waking up, so I may be starting to get emails. All right, so we're going to read through this chapter and just follow along as you can, okay? So chapter 2. The bunkhouse was a long rectangular building. Inside the walls were whitewashed and the floor unpainted. In 3 walls were small, large square windows, and in the 4th a solid door with a wooden latch. Against the walls were 8 bunks, 5 of them made up with blankets and the other 3 showing their burlap ticking. Over each bunk was a nailed apple box with the opening for it so that it made 2 shelves for the personal belongings of the occupant of the bunk. And these shelves were loaded with little articles, soap and talcum powder, razors, and those Western magazines ranchmen love to read and scoff at and secretly believe. And there were medicines on the shelves, and little vials, combs from the nails From nails on the box sides, a few neckties. Near one wall there was a black cast iron stove, its stovepipe going straight up through the ceiling. In the middle of the room was a big square table, littered with playing cards, and around it were grouped boxes for the players to sit on. At about 10, sorry, I'm trying to get this to go away. There we go. At about 10 o'clock in the morning, the sun threw a bright dust-laden bar through one of the side windows, and in and out of the beam flies shot like rushing stars. The wooden latch raised, the door opened and tall. Stoop-shouldered old man came in. He was dressed in blue jeans, and he carried a big push broom in his left hand. Behind him came George, and behind George, Lenny. "The boss was expecting you last night," the old man said. "He was sore as hell when you wasn't here to go out this morning." He pointed with his right arm, and out of the sleeve came a stick-like wrist, but no hand. "You can have them 2 beds there," he said, indicating 2 bunks near the stove. George stepped over and threw his blankets down on the burlap sack of straw that was a mattress. He looked into his box shelf and then picked a small yellow can from it. "Say, what the hell is this?" "I don't know," said the old man. "Says it positively kills lice, roaches, and other scourges. What the hell kind of bed you giving us, anyway? We don't want no pants rabbits." The old swamper shifted his broom and held it between his elbow and his side while he held out his hand for the can. He studied the label carefully. "Tell you what," he said finally. "Last guy that had this bed was a blacksmith. Hell of a nice fella and a clean guy, as you want to meet. Used to wash his hands even after he ate. But how come he got graybacks?" George was working up a slow anger. Lenny put his bindle in the neighboring bunk and sat down. He watched George with an open mouth. "Tell you what," said the old swamper. "This here blacksmith, named Whitey, was the kind of man that would put the stuff around even if there wasn't no bugs, just to make sure, you see. Tell you, what he used to do at meals, he'd peel and boil his potatoes, and he'd take out every little spot, no matter what kind, even before he ate it. And if there was a red splotch on an egg, he'd scrape it off. Finally quit about the food. That's the kind of guy he was. Clean. Used to dress up Sundays even when we wasn't going no place. Put on a necktie even, and then sat in the bunkhouse." "I ain't so sure," said George skeptically. "What did you say he quit for?" Old man put the yellow can in his pocket, and he rubbed his bristly white whiskers with his knuckles. "Why, he just quit. The way a guy will. Says it was the food. Just wanted to move. Didn't give no other reason but the food. Just says, 'Give me my time,' one night. The way any guy would." George lifted his tick and looked underneath it. He leaned over and inspected the sack closely. Immediately, Lenny got up and did the same with his bed. Finally, George seemed satisfied. He unrolled his bindle and put the things on the shelf. His razor and bar soap, his comb and bottle of pills, his liniment and leather wristband. Then he made his bed up neatly with blankets. The old man said, "I guess the boss will be out here in a minute. He was sure burned when you wasn't here this morning. Come right in when we was eating breakfast and says, 'Where the hell's them new men?' And he gave the stable buck a hell, too." George patted a wrinkle out of his bed and sat down. "Give the stable buck hell?" he said. "Yeah, sure. You see, the stable buck's a nigger." "A nigger? Huh?" And I'm going to tell y'all that word is offensive. I never say it, but if it's in education and we're reading, I will. "Yeah, nice fella, too. Got a crooked back where a horse kicked him. Boss gives him hell when he's mad. But the stable buck don't give a damn about that. He reads a lot. Got books in his room." "What kind of guy's the boss?" George asked. "Well, he's a pretty nice fella. Gets pretty mad sometimes, but he's pretty nice. Tell you what, know what he done Christmas? Bring a gallon of whiskey right in here and says, 'Drink hearty, boys. Christmas comes once a year.' The hell he did, a whole gallon? Yes, sir, Jesus, we had fun. They let the nigger come in that night. Little Skinner came with a Smitty out, took after him. Done pretty good, too. The guys wouldn't let him use his feet, so the nigger got him. If he could use his feet, Smitty said he would have killed him. The guy's on the account of the nigger's crooked back. Smitty can't use his feet." He paused in relish of the memory. "After that, the guys went to Soledad and raised hell. I didn't go in there. I ain't got the poop to go no more." Lenny was just finished making his bed. Wooden latch raised again and the door opened. A little stocky man in the open doorway. He wore blue jean trousers, a flannel shirt, a black unbuttoned vest, and a black coat. His thumbs were stuck in his belt, on each side of a square steel buckle. On his head was a soiled brown Stetson hat, and he wore high-heeled boots and spurs just to prove he wasn't a laboring man. The old swamper looked quickly at him and then shuffled to the door, rubbing his whiskers with his knuckles as he went. "Them guys just come," he said, shuffled past the boss and out the door. The boss stepped into the room with the short, quick steps of a fat-legged man. "I wrote Murray and Reddy. I wanted these two men here this morning. You got your work slips?" George reached into his pocket and produced the slips and handed them to the boss. "It wasn't Murray and Reddy's fault. It says right here on the slip you was here for work this morning." George looked down at his feet. "Bus driver gave us a bum steer," he said. "We had to walk 10 miles. Says we was here when we wasn't. We couldn't get no rides this morning." That's the answer to number 1. The boss squinted his eyes. "Well, I had to send out the grain team short 2 buckers. Won't do no good go out till after dinner." He pulled his time book out of his pocket and opened it where a pencil stuck between the leaves. George scowled meaningful at Lenny, and Lenny nodded to show that he understood. The boss licked his pencil. "What's yours?" "George Milton." "And what's yours?" George said, "His name's Lenny Small." The names were entered in the book. Let's see. This is your 20th, noon. This is the 20th, noon, the 20th. He closed his book. "Where you boys been working?" "Up around Weed," said George. "You too?" to Lenny. "Yeah, him too," said George. The boss pointed a playful finger at Lenny. "He ain't much of a talker, is he?" "No, he ain't. But he's sure a hell of a good worker. Strong as a bull." Lenny smiled to himself. "Strong as a bull," he repeated. George scowled at him, and Lenny dropped his head in the shame having forgotten. The boss said suddenly, "Listen, Small." Lenny raised his head. "What can you do?" In a panic, Lenny looked at George for help. "He can do anything you tell him," said George. "He's a good skinner. He can wrestle grain bags. He can drive a cultivator. He can do anything. Just give him a try." The boss turned on George. "Then why don't you let him answer? What are you trying to pull over?" George broke in madly. "Oh, I ain't saying he's bright. He ain't. But he's a goddamn good worker. He can put up 400-pound a pound bale." The boss deliberately put the little book in his pocket. He hooked his thumbs in his belt, squinting one eye nearly. "Say, what you selling? Huh?" I said, "What stake you got in this guy? You taking his pay away from him?" "No, of course I ain't. Why you think I'm selling him out?" "Well, I never seen one guy take so much trouble for another guy. I'd just like to know what your interest is." "I'd just like to know," George said, "he's my cousin. I told his old lady I'd take care of him. He got kicked in the head by a horse when he was a kid. He's all right, just ain't bright, but he can do anything you tell him." That's number 2. The boss turned half away. "Well, God knows he don't need no brains to buck barley bags. But don't you try to pull nothing over, Milton. I got my eye on you. Why'd you quit and weed?" "The job was done," said George promptly. "What kind of job?" We was digging a cesspool." "All right, but don't try to pull nothing over, 'cause you can't get away with nothing. I seen wise guys before go on out with the grain teams after dinner. They're picking up barley and thrashing machine. Go out with Slim's team." "Slim?" "Yeah, big tall Skinner. You'll see him at dinner." He turned abruptly and went to the door. Before he went out and turned, he looked a long moment at the 2 men. When the sound of his footsteps had died, George turned to Lenny. "So you wasn't going to say a word? You wasn't going to leave your big flapper shut and leave me to do the talking? Damn near lost us the job." Lenny stared hopelessly at his hands. "I forgot, George." "Yeah, you forgot. You always forgot. Forget, and I gotta talk you out of it." He sat down heavily on the bunk. "Now he's got his eye on us. Now we gotta be careful and not make no slips. You keep your big flapper shut after this." He fell morosely silent. "George, what do you want now?" "I wasn't kicked in the head with no horse, George, was I, George?" "Be a damn good thing if you was," George said viciously. "Save everybody a hell of a lot of trouble." "You said I was your cousin, George." "Well, that was a lie, and I'm damn glad it was. If I was a relative of yours, I'd shoot myself." He stopped suddenly, stepped into the open door, and peered out. "Say, what the hell you doing listening?" Old man came in slowly into the room. He had his broom in his hand, and at his heels he walked a drag-footed sheepdog, gray muzzle with pale, blind old eyes. The dog struggled lamely to the side of the room and lay down, grunting softly to himself and licking his grizzled, moth-eaten coat. The swamper watched him until he settled. "I wasn't listening. I was just standing in the shade a minute, scratching my dog. I just now finished swamping out in the wash house." "You was poking your big ears into our business," George said, "and I don't like nobody getting nosy." The old man looked uneasy from George to Lenny and then back. "I just come there," he said. "I didn't hear nothing you guys was saying. I ain't interested in nothing you was saying. A guy on a ranch don't never listen. Nor he don't ask no questions. Damn right he don't, said George, slightly mollified. Not if he wants to stay working long. He was reassured by the swamper's defense. Come on in and sit down a minute, he said. That's a hell of an old dog. Yeah, I had him ever since he was a pup. God, he was a good sheepdog when he was younger. He stood his broom against the wall, rubbed his white bristled cheek with his knuckles. How'd you like the boss? He asked. Pretty good, he seemed all right. He's a nice fellow, Swamper agreed. You had to take him right. At the moment, a young man came into the bunkhouse. Thin young man with a brown face, brown eyes, and a head of tightly curled hair. He wore a work glove on his hand, and like the boss, he wore high-heeled boots. Seen my old man? He asked. The Swamper said. He was just here a minute ago, Curly. Went over to the cookhouse, I think. I'll try to catch him, said Curly. His eyes passed over the new man and stopped. Glanced coldly at George and then at Lenny. His arms gradually bent at the elbows and his hands closed to fist. He stiffened and went into a slight crouch. His glance was once calculating and pugnacious. Lenny squirmed under the look, shifted to his feet nervously. Curly stepped gingerly close to him. You the new guys the old man was waiting for? We just come in, said George. Let the big guy talk. Lenny twisted with embarrassment. George said, Suppose he won't talk. Curly lashed his body around. By Christ, he's gotta talk when he's spoke to. What the hell are you getting into it for? We travel together, said George coldly. Oh, so it's that way. George was tense and motionless. Yeah, is that way. Lenny was looking hopelessly to George for instructions. And you won't let the big guy talk, is that it? He can talk if he wants to tell you anything. He nodded slightly to Lenny. We just come in, Lenny said softly. Curly stared levelly at him. Well, next time you answer when you're spoken to. He turned toward the door and walked out. His elbows were still a little bent. This is Curly. Curly is the boss's son. He's a younger guy. You can tell that he thinks he's better than everybody. He's got something to prove. You notice that he went straight up to Lenny, which is the biggest one of the two. So he's trying to prove something. Okay. The old man looked cautiously at the door to make sure no one was listening. That's the boss's son, he said quietly. Curly's pretty handy. He's done quite a bit in the ring. He's a lightweight, and he's handy. Well, let him be handy, said George. He don't have to take after Lenny. Lenny didn't do nothing to him. What's he got against Lenny? The Swamper considered. Well, tell you what. Curly's like a lot of little guys. He hates big guys. He's all the time picking scraps with big guys. Kind of like he's mad at him because he ain't a big guy. You seen little guys like that, ain't you? Always scrappy? Sure, said George. I've seen plenty tough little guys, but this Curly better not make no mistakes about Lenny. Lenny ain't handy, but this Curly punk is gonna get hurt if he messes around with him. Well, Curly's pretty handy. And when they're saying handy, like, they mean they can handle their business, like, that he can fight. The Swamper said skeptically, Never did seem right to me. Suppose Curly jumps a big guy and licks him. Everybody says what a game guy Curly is. And suppose he does do the same thing and gets licked. And then everybody says the big guy ought to pick somebody his own size. Maybe they gang up on the big guy. Never did seem right to me. Seems like Curly ain't giving nobody a chance. George was watching the door. He said ominously, Well, you better watch out for Lenny. Lenny ain't no fighter, but Lenny's strong and quick. And Lenny don't know no rules. He walked to the square table and sat down in one of the boxes. He gathered some of the cards together and shuffled them. The old man sat down in another box. Don't tell Curly I said none of this. He'd slough me. He just don't give a damn. Won't ever get canned because his old man's the boss. George cut down the cards and began turning them over, looking at each one and throwing it into a pile. This guy Curly sounds like a son of a bitch to me. I don't like mean little guys. Seems to me like he's worse lately, said the Swamper. He got married a couple weeks ago. Wife lives over in the boss's house. Seems like Curly is cockier than ever since he got married. George grunted. Maybe he's showing off for his wife. Swamper warmed to his gossip. You seen that glove on his left hand? Yeah, I seen it. Well, glove's full of Vaseline. Vaseline? What for? Well, I'll tell you what. Curly says he's keeping that hand soft for his wife. George studied the cards absorbedly. That's a dirty thing to tell around, he said. Old man reassured, drawing a derogatory statement from George. He felt safe now, and he spoke more confidently. Wait till you'll see Curly's wife. George cut the cards again and pulled out a solitary lay, slowly and deliberately. Bertie? he asked casually. Yeah, pretty, but... George studied his cards. But what? Well, she got the eye. Yeah? Married 2 weeks and got the eye? Maybe that's why Curly's pants is full of ants. I've seen her give Slim the eye. Slim's a jerk-line Skinner. Hell of a nice fella. Slim don't need to wear no high-heeled boots on a green team. I've seen her give Slim the eye. Curly never seen it. And I've seen her give Carlson the eye. George pretended a lack of interest. Looks like we're gonna have fun. The Swamper stood up from his bunk. Know what I think? George didn't answer. Well, I think Curly married a tart. He ain't the first, said George. There's plenty that done that. So you can see that Curly's married, but Curly's wife is definitely interested in everybody else. So that will become an issue later. Number 3 says, what does Curly think about George and Lenny traveling together? He kind of made an assumption. I just wanted, what do you think that Curly thinks about the two of them traveling together? Ooh, excuse me. Number 4, pretty just, why do you think George is answering all of Lenny's questions? Okay. And then 5 is just, why do you think the boss is suspicious of them? Okay, there's a lot of things. He kind of stated it a little bit ago, but we're going to keep going. All right, where are we going to go? The old man moved toward the door, and his ancient dog lifted his head and peered about, and then got painfully to his feet to follow. I gotta be setting out to wash the basins for the guys. The teams will be in for before long. You guys gonna buck barley? Yeah. You won't tell Curly nothing I said? Hell no. Well, you look her over, mister. You see if she ain't a tart. He stepped out the door into the brilliant sunshine. George laid down his cards thoughtfully, turned his piles of 3. He built 4 clubs on his ace pile. The sun square was on the floor now. The flies whipped through it like little sparks. A sound of jingling harness and the croak of heavy-laden axles sounded from outside. From the distance, a clear call. Stable buck! Hey, stable buck! And then, where the hell's that damn nigger? George stared at his solitary lay, and then he flounced the cards together and turned around to Lenny. Lenny was lying down in the bunk watching him. Look, Lenny, this here ain't no setup. I'm scared. You're gonna have trouble with that Curly guy. I seen that kind before. He was kind of feeling you out. He figures he's got you scared. He's gonna take a sock at you the first chance he gets. Lenny's eyes were frightened. I don't want no trouble, he said plaintively. Don't let him sock me, George. George got up and went over to Lenny's bunk and sat down on it. Kind of hate that bastard, he said. I've seen plenty of them, like the old guy says. Curly don't take no chances. He always wins. He thought for a moment. If he tangles with you, Lenny, we're gonna get the can. Don't make no mistake about that. He's the boss's son. Look, Lenny, you try to keep away from him, will you? Don't never speak to him. If he comes in here, you move clear to the other side of the room. Will you do that, Lenny? I don't want no trouble, Lenny mourned. I never did nothing to him. Well, that won't do you no good if Curly wants to plug himself up for a fighter. Just don't have nothing to do with him. Will you remember? Sure, George. I ain't gonna say a word. The sound of the approaching grain teams was louder. Thud of big hooves on the hard ground, drag of brakes, and the jingle of trace chains. Men were calling back and forth from the teams. George, sitting on the bunks beside Lenny, frowned as he thought. Lenny asked timidly, You ain't mad, George? I ain't mad at you. I'm mad at this Curly. I hoped he was going to get a little stake together, maybe $100. His tone grew decisive. You keep away from Curly, Lenny. Sure I will, George. I won't say a word. Don't let him pull you in. But if he socks you, you let him have it. Let him have what, George? Never mind. I'll tell you when. I hate that kind of guy. Look, Lenny, if you get in any kind of trouble, you remember what I told you? Lenny raised up on his elbow. His face contorted, then his eyes moved sadly to George's face. If I get in any trouble, you ain't gonna let me tend the rabbits. That's not what I meant. You remember where we slept last night down by the river? Yeah, I remember. Oh, sure, I remember. I go there and hide in the brush. Hide till I come for you. Don't let nobody see you. Hide in the brush by the river. Say that over. Hide in the brush by the river. Down in the brush by the river. If you get into trouble. If I get in trouble. Brakes screeched outside. A call came. Stable buck. Oh, stable buck. George said, say it over to yourself, Lenny, so you won't forget it. Both men glanced up, for the rectangle of sunshine in the doorway was cut off. A girl was standing there looking in. She had full rouged lips and wide-spaced eyes, heavily made up. Her fingernails were red. Her hair was hung in little rolled clusters like sausages. She wore a cotton house dress, and red mules on the insteps were little bouquets of red ostrich feathers. "I'm looking for Curly," she said. Her voice was a nasal, brittle quality. George looked away from her, then back. "He was in here a minute ago, but he went." "Oh." She put her hands behind her back and leaned against the doorframe so that her body was thrown forward. "You're the new fellows that just came in, ain't you?" "Yeah." Lenny's eyes moved down her body, and though she did not seem to be looking at Lenny, she bridled a little. She looked at her fingernails. "Sometimes Curly's in here," she explained. George said brusquely, "Well, he ain't now." "If he ain't, I guess I better go look someplace else," she said playfully. Lenny watched her, fascinated. George said, "If I see him, I'll pass the word you was looking for him." She smiled archly, twitched her body. "Nobody can't blame a person for looking," she said. There were footsteps behind her going by. She turned her head. "Hi, Slim," she said. Slim's voice came through the door. "Hi, good looking." "I'm trying to find Curly, Slim." "Well, you ain't trying very hard. I seen him going in your house." She was suddenly apprehensive. "Bye, boys," she called into the bunkhouse and hurried away. George looked around at Lenny. "Jesus, what a tramp," he said. "So that's what Curly picks for a wife." "She's purty," said Lenny defensively. "Yeah, and she's sure hiding it. Curly got his work ahead of him. Bet she'd clear out for $20. Lenny still stared at the door where she had been. "Gosh, she was purty." He smiled admiringly. George looked quickly down at him and then took him by the ear and shook him. "Listen to me," he said fiercely. "Don't you even take a look at her. I don't care what she says and what she does. I've seen 'em poison before, but I ain't never seen no piece of jailbait worse than her. You leave her be." Lenny tried to disengage his ear. "I never done nothing, George." "No, you never. But when she was standing in the doorway showing her legs, you wasn't looking the other way either." "I never meant no harm, George. Honest, I never." "Well, you keep away from her because she's a rat trap if I ever seen one. You let Curly take the rat. He let himself in for it. Glove full of Vaseline," George said disgustedly. "And I bet he's eating raw eggs and rotten to the patent medicine houses." Lenny cried out suddenly. "I don't like this place, George. This ain't no good place. I want to get out of here." "We gotta keep it until we can get a stake. We can't help it, Lenny. We'll get out just as soon as we can. I don't like it no better than you do." He went back to the table and set out a new solitaire hand. "No, I don't like it. For 2 bits, I'd shove out of here. If we can get just a few dollars in the poke, we'd shove off and go up to the American River and pan gold. We can make maybe a couple of dollars a day there. We might hit a pocket." Lenny leaned eagerly towards him. "Let's go, George. Let's get out of here. It's mean here." "We gotta stay," George said shortly. "Now shut up now. The guys will be coming in." From the washroom nearby came the sound of running water rattling basins. George studied the cards. "Maybe we ought to wash up," he said. "But we ain't done nothing to get dirty." A tall man stood in the doorway, held a crushed Stetson hat under his arm while he combed his long, black, damp, straight hair. Like the others, he wore blue jeans and a short denim jacket. When he had finished combing his hair, he moved into the room. He moved with a jerk-line Skinner and the prince of a ranch capable of driving 10, 16, even 20 mules with a single line of leaders. He was capable of killing a fly in the wheeler's butt with a bullwhip without touching the mule. There was gravity in his manner, and he was quiet, so profound that all talk stopped when he spoke. His authority was great, so that his word was taken on any subject, be it politics or love. This was Slim, the jerk-line Skinner. His hatchet face was ageless. He might have been 35 or 50. His ear heard more than what was said to him. His slow speech overtones not of thought, but of understanding beyond thought. His hands, large and lean, were as delicate in their action as those of a temple dancer. He smoothed out his crushed hat, creased it in the middle, and put it on. He looked kindly at the two in the bunkhouse. "It's bright in her bitch outside," he said gently. "Can't hardly see nothing in here. You the new guys?" "Just come," said George. "Gonna bug Barley?" "It's what the boss says." Slim sat down on the box across the table from George. He studied the solitaire hand that was upside down to him. "Hope you get on my team," he said. His voice was very gentle. "I got a pair of punks on my team that don't know a barley bag from a blue ball. You guys ever buck Barley?" "Hell yes," said George. "I ain't nothing to scream about, but that big bastard there can put more grain alone than most pears can." Lenny, who had been following the conversation up and back and forth with his eyes, smiled complacently at the compliment. "Hey, hush." He leaned over the table and snapped the corner of a loose card. You guys traveling around together? His voice was friendly and invited confidence without demanding it. Sure, said George. We kind of look after each other. He indicated Lenny with his thumb. He ain't bright. Hell of a good worker, though. Hell of a nice fella, but he ain't bright. I've known him for a while now. For a long time. Slim looked through George and beyond him. Ain't many guys travel together, he mused. I don't know why. Maybe everybody in the whole damn world is scared of each other. It's a lot nicer to go around with a guy, said George. A powerful, big-stomached man came into the bunkhouse. His head still dripped from Roddy from scrubbing and dousing. Hey, Slim, he said, then stopped and stared at George and Lenny. These guys just come, said Slim by the way of introduction. Glad to meet you, the big man said. Name's Carlson. I'm George Milton. This here's Lenny Small. Glad to meet you, Carlson said again. He ain't very small. He chuckled softly at his joke. Ain't small at all, he repeated. Meant to ask you, Slim, how's your dog? I seen she wasn't under your wagon this winter. She slang her pups last night, said Slim. 9 of them. I drawn 4 of them right off. She couldn't feed that many. Got 5 left? Huh? Yeah, 5. I kept the biggest. What kind of dogs do you think they're gonna be? I don't know, said Slim. Some kind of shepherds, I guess. That's the most kind I seen around here when she was in heat. Carlson went on. Got 5 pups, huh? Gonna keep all of them? I don't know. Have to keep them a while so they can drink Lulu's milk. Carlson said thoughtfully. Well, look at here, Slim. I've been thinking that dog of Candy's is so damn old, he can't hardly walk. Stinks like hell, too. Every time he comes in the bunk, I can smell him for 3 days. Why don't you get Candy to shoot his old dog and give him one of the pups to raise up? I can smell that dog a mile away. Got no teeth, damn near blind, can't eat. Candy feeds him milk. He can't chew nothing else. Okay, so Candy's the old man with the old dog. And you gotta think during this time period, dogs were not pets. Dogs were kept for working purposes. So if your dog couldn't work anymore, most people looked at you like you were crazy if you kept him. Like, what's the point? Why keep a dog that can't help you? George had been staring intently at Slim. Suddenly a triangle began to ring outside. Slowly at first, then faster and faster until the beat of it disappeared into a ringing sound. It stopped as suddenly as it started. There she goes, said Carlson outside. Outside, there was a burst of voices as a group of men went by. Slim stood up slowly with dignity. You guys better come on while there's still something to eat. Won't be nothing left in a couple of minutes. Carlson stepped back to let Slim precede him, and the 2 men went out the door. Lenny was watching George excitedly. George rumpled his cards into a messy pile. Yeah, George said. I heard him, Lenny. I'll ask him. A brown and a white one, Lenny cried excitedly. Come on, let's get dinner. I don't know whether he got a brown and a white one. Lenny didn't move from his buck. You ask him right away, George, so he won't kill no more of them. Sure, come on now, get up to your feet. Lenny rolled off his bunk, stood up. 2 of them started for the door. Just as they reached it, Curly bounced in. You seen a girl around here? He demanded angrily. George said coldly. About half an hour ago, maybe. Well, what the hell was she doing? George stood still, watching the little angry man. He said insultingly, She said she was looking for you. Curly seemed really to see George for the first time. His eyes flashed over George. Took in his height, measured his reach. Look at his trim middle. Well, which way'd she go? He demanded at last. I don't know, George said. I didn't watch her go. Curly scowled at him and turned and hurried out the door. George said, You know, Lenny, I'm scared I'm going to tangle with that bastard myself. I hate his guts. Jesus Christ. Come on. There won't be a damn thing left to eat. They went out the door. The sunshine lay in the thin line under the window. From a distance, there could be heard a rattle of dishes. After a moment, the ancient dog walked away, lamely through the open door. He gazed about the mild, half-blind eyes. He sniffed and then lay down and put his head between his paws. Curly popped into the doorway again and stood looking into the room. The dog raised his head, but when Curly jerked out, the grizzled head sank to the floor again. Okay, so the guys just met the new guys. They've got their bunks. We met Curly. Not the nicest guy. Okay, so I want you to use that information and answer those questions for me.